Hello and welcome to a new episode of Beyond the Words. Today, my guest has worked at Apple. She has worked at Twitter. She's worked as a localization manager at Google for the last 6 years now, I believe. She brings a wealth of experience to the table. Gargi Hazra, hello and welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruno. Thank you for having me.
Now, Gargi, what the viewers and listeners must be thinking, Gargi works as a localization manager at Google. So is it just about using Google Translate and job done?
Absolutely not. I wish it was that simple. I take Google Translate as, a basic spice rack. Like if you were to try and cook a gourmet meal, that's what Google Translate is to you. You can get the basic flavors right, perhaps, with Google Translate, but if you're talking about, creating the real magic, that comes with understanding the recipe, like, the slangs and the nuances of the language, so on and so forth. So that's why, like, Google Translate is, it has its own limitation. Um, I perhaps would use Google Translate to check quickly on a single word. Like if I'm going across Los Gatos, I am to understand, like, what does the word Los Gatos mean? I probably will pick up my phone and, check what the term means. Or if I'm in a restaurant, I probably would want to check on a certain non-English name to figure out whether it's chicken or fish. But that's about it. I don't venture beyond that with Google Translate.
I'm glad to see we're on the same wavelength. And yeah, Google Translate has also saved my life on numerous occasions when you're in front of a menu and you're like, I'm not sure what I'm going to pick now. And it saved me a lot of trouble and having certainly fairly uncomfortable things on my plate.
Yeah.
Now, as I said in my introduction, you worked for some of the biggest names in the tech industry. As I said, Apple and Twitter, and now Google. Now, what have you learned from those big brands from a localization point of view in the last 10 years?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I learned a lot from these companies as I majority of my experience had been in these companies and I've learned a lot from them. Although I have been in localization, the the products were different from companies to companies. Their target audience and their approaches were very different from each other. So, if I have to talk about the similarity, one thing that I've noticed across these companies is that each of these tech giants had similar goals, which was to capture an international market and in their respective fields. So, all of these companies understand the concept of localization, that in some way we as companies need to reach to users beyond USA. Their approaches to do that had been different, and and they use different tools and methods, and their target audience was different. So the approach had been different, but the goal had been very similar. The other similarity that I had seen was there were a lot of similarities around the localization challenges that they had faced. So, for a lot of teams, localization was often an afterthought, and it took a lot of evangelization and education for them, for the content creators or the product teams to understand that localization should be a center of their strategy. Localization is often perceived as operational only, when in reality, localization can really be your secret sauce to revenue generation and market growth. Measuring of localization ROI had been a common gap across multiple teams and multiple companies, even beyond these tech giants, just as an industry. So there had been, like, if I talk about localization challenges, there had been a lot of similarities there as well. But things are improving. The perception is changing now. A lot more companies understand what localization is and what it can bring to the table. So that is changing in the positive direction gradually. If I have to talk about the differences, so like I said, the approaches to achieve their goal had been very different. So, Twitter, for example, Twitter deals with the fast paced world of online conversation. So, they have mastered as such the adapting to trends and hashtags and slangs for different languages. Another unique challenge with Twitter was, how do we deal with the limited character counts across multiple languages, because as we know, except for the Asian languages, a lot of other languages only expand. So, how do we kind of deal with that challenge? Twitter was also one of the very few companies at that point that ventured into crowdsourcing. And it was very unique to the company, but it served its purpose. Twitter was achieving its goal and objectives that it has. So it served its own purpose. Apple, on the other hand, is like Apple's strength, in my humble opinion, was its attention to detail. From precise font rendering to culturally appropriate icon, and everything together kind of enhanced the localization experience there. Localization was genuinely at the center of their growth strategy, and it wasn't just text translations. They understood that localization was far more beyond that. It was about the imageries, it was about the messaging, the campaign, the whole storytelling had to be, localized and made like tailored to the target audience. So something I remember from Apple's time is how it would hyper localize for some of its nuanced markets, and how they would even go on to select vendors who had a very strong regional presence so that the macro nuances of the market could be captured, and something that we couldn't do from here in US. So yes, to sum up, like there are similarities in terms of their goals and what they want to do with their brand presence, but how they do it is where the differences lie in.
And what I found fascinating in what you're saying is like almost how their brand image transpires in their localization practices. And if you take the example of Apple, you must have worked on some fabulous campaigns. And I think you were working there in 2013, 2014, or something like that. So we're talking about the heyday of the iPhone and the iPad. And those campaigns, I mean, we all remember those campaigns and the international campaigns. And working on that must be absolutely fantastic. When you say attention to detail as well, you can think, yes, of course, attention to detail, because their products is all about that. It's almost like trickles down from the top as well. It's very much like a sort of top-down culture, and then like Twitter, more sort of startup kind of culture, and working out things as you go along. And you can imagine that at Twitter at the time, in the sort of a Jack Dorsey era, how it was. It's really, really interesting to hear that. Now, in terms of, I think you've been in the localization industry for over 10 years now. From a macro perspective, how have you seen the localized industry evolve?
If I have to use two words, I would say matured and being sophisticated. That's how I would describe the evolution of the industry. When I joined the industry like years ago, human translation was the way to go about it. We would ideally, like every time we would localize an asset, irrespective of the file type, we would ideally pair 2 to 3 resources for it. So one would do the human translation, another would be a reviewer reviewing the translated copy and applying style guides, so on and so forth. So it was very rule-based, and there was heavy dependency on CAT tools and translation memories, so etc. Today, the focus has shifted towards machine translation and automation. There's statistical machine translation, neural machine translation, but point being that, a lot of these automated technologies are used today by multiple companies, and that have enabled faster content processing and reducing project durations and, just improving the whole localization experience in that sense. I kind of touched on this, but I think there's also been a shift in the localization perception over the last 10 years. Businesses are recognizing more and more the value of localization and how it is important to reach global audiences and how it can boost revenue. And the fact that localization just goes beyond words is also very well understood today. They may not know how exactly it goes beyond words, and that's exactly that's why people like us exist. That's like our job to do. But conceptually, a lot more businesses and people and teams know that localization is the key to unlock their full potential.
Yeah, that's music to my ears, actually, and you're right. I see that sometimes it is perceived or has been perceived as a commodity, but when you speak to a lot of people, they do understand now that it's not something to be taken lightly. It's not something that just comes at the end of marketing and a necessary evil. It
Yeah.
has to be part of your marketing mix. And as you said, you said earlier about Apple understanding that it's the secret sauce, and yes, we do talk to a lot of clients as well who do understand that, and it's always refreshing to see that. So I suppose from your answer, I guess that you will see in the next like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you will see MTP and Euro Machine Translation and Gen AI as well to take a bigger share of the pie.
Yes. In the next 5 years, I think the industry will continue its path towards sophistication. If I have to talk about the trends that I anticipate happening in the next 5 years, I would say first, there's definitely going to be a rise of large language models or LLMs. LLMs have the potential to further automate translation processes, especially if there are repetitive translation works, like LLMs can just speed that up. If there are transcreational elements around, video generations or image generation, which traditional localization mechanisms have not been able to, I don't want to say a good job, but like it usually is a long drawn process. Like LLMs will come in and speed that up. So that's a definite trend shift that I see happening, like moving even from automated translation like NNTs to LLMs and large scale, like large language models.
Yeah.
I also see the industry to shift and focus more around personalization and customization. So localization will become even more granular with content tailored to specific user segments and catering regional variations beyond just the language aspect of it. And then the third thing that I see is also a, a rise of real-time and on-demand translations as well. So advancements in AI could enable like seamless real-time translations for situations like video conferencing or subtitling or chat, like automated chat support, so on and so forth. So exciting times ahead for localization and a
Totally.
lot more Gen
Yeah.
AI elements in there.
Yeah, I picked up on the personalization element as well, as you say, like tech enables us to do that, and I think it reflects a trend as well. From a marketing perspective, we see more and more account-based marketing, for example.
Yes.
So really targeting specific accounts with specific messages, not just industries, but really specific accounts. And I think it's a trend that we're seeing throughout marketing and localization. Totally.
Absolutely.
Now, from a personal level, how would you say you approach from that perspective, like marketing translation, compared to this sort of we'll say automated translation in sort of processes? How do you approach it? Is it still human based mainly?
I don't believe that localization is monolithic. I like anytime we create a content, that content has its own purpose that it's meant to achieve. And there's always a target audience that we have in mind that we want to throw that content to. Localization should also be mapped according to that target audience and according to the content purpose that it has. So if I have to break that down into how this gets implemented, within the marketing world, there may be some content types or pages or assets where the need is to really get more accurate information and the latest information in the local language. The nuances of the linguistic elements may not be as important in those aspects, right? So it's really like, maybe a page is giving you some data points and really being able to get those data points in most accurate and latest version is what your need is.
Yeah, data sheet, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so machine translation is the best workflow that maps against that content category. But on the other hand, if you're creating a marketing campaign where you want to localize it in such a way that when a non-English speaker is reading it, he or she feels that that content is meant for them. So that's when you would want to use human translation and make sure that it's hyper localized and each and every element of that campaign is scrutinized to make sure how can you make it really relevant for the audience that you're targeting at. So that's the content, or that's a use case where I would use human translation and make sure what other elements of localization I can apply to it to make it very, very regional. There are So these are, if I say that these are the two spectrums, there are marketing elements that lie in between where, you can't really throw a raw machine translated content at users, but you also can't, like, you have to keep some qualitative elements in mind as well. So that would be the area where I would use a combination, like a hybrid model, where I would use machine translation, but do some level of post editing as well, so that, it covers bases from all angles and perspectives. So to kind of go back to your original question, I don't think there is like a one shoe fits all size kind of thing. Like, it really depends on what I'm trying to achieve with the content that I'm localizing, and then map the localization workflow according to that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you touched upon that, and I think there's another element which is visibility as well. If you take a website, and your homepage is basically your shop window, so you will probably pay a lot more attention to that. If you've got a slider at the top and with like key messages, you will make sure you put your best people on the case. And again, they put the message across. They translate the idea and not so much the words. They put they understand the emotions as well that you want to convey, and all these things. And then when you've got something a lot deeper on your website, which is more about generating SEO and these sort of things, then maybe won't have the same attention as your homepage would have. I read an article recently where you were quoted. It was about overcoming language barriers in global marketing. And I was very interested in the fact that, and I quote you, you mentioned the importance of understanding the cultural difference. So again, can you tell us how this is conveyed in the field, the cultural differences?
Sure. When you say how this is conveyed in the field, do you mean what are the tactical ways that we take this concept and implement in our day-to-day job?
Yeah, for example, yes. If you can tell us, like, okay, there are certain campaigns where we have to take certain cultural differences into account, whether it's in the message, whether it's in the imagery, these sort of things.
Understood. Sure. What I was highlighting in that article is that, again, like, localization is not just about language translation, but it is more about understanding your target market or your target audience and its associated culture, and then adapting your content towards it. So one example would be, let's say you have a registration form that you want to localize, right? Had it just been about translation, we would have just localized or translated the fields in that form. So first name, last name, address, email address, and then a submit CTA maybe. But we know that if we do that, it will not solve for all market. One example is in a lot of the Asian markets, the format of the honorifics differ. So the order of your first name and your last name is switched over for languages like Japanese, for example. As localization experts, or as localization peeps, when we localize a form, we tend to kind of catch all these gaps and make sure that when we are scoping the project, or when we are thinking of how to localize this form in particular in this example, that's something that we would automatically catch at the first sight. And we would say that, well, don't just translate the fields. This is how it should appear. So let's make sure that the behavioral aspect of this form is also correctly adapted to the target audience. So part of our job would be to work with the content creators and make sure that, we educate them and recommend the best way to kind of deal with this form situation. Part of our work would be to work with the engineers and to make sure that the form is coded in such a way that it detects the language and then switch the order in the programmatic way. So that's a very kind of, common example of how localization goes beyond words. And we are not only just translating the fields and just saying, our job is done, here is the localized form, but really going a step beyond and saying that, okay, we can translate it, but do we need to do a little bit more to make this relevant to the target audience and, to make sure that they're actually using it in the way that they want to. Another common example is the usage of hyperboles and how that differs from culture to culture. In American English, we love to go big. Our burgers are incredible. Our, coffee is the best in the world. Well, even our weekends are always amazing and awesome. And, like everything is big and bigger and, biggest.
Yeah.
That's not how it works in other languages. In a lot of Asian cultures, they value humility and modesty. And as such, they would avoid all of those exaggerations and rather use a more realistic, toned down version of these expressions, which often, to be very honest, starts with good and ends with good. That's about it. But that's how, that kind of goes on to say that, how the same thing can be perceived differently and can be reacted to differently in different cultures. So for us, localization is really beyond translating the words, and it is really a prism through which elements like cultural values, sensibilities, societal norms, and all those factors kind of refract. And we can only do a good job of it when we seamlessly navigate through the realm of this cultural fluency and not just, think of it as translating the words and then just be done with it.
Yeah, I love what you said there, and the superlatives and all these things, and compared to humility, and also it has legal implications as well. I know that
Yes.
when it's in American English, best in class, or and again, using superlatives pretty easily, and sometimes we don't know whether it's backed up or not,
Yes.
And I know that, like, for example, in European markets, which is, what we focus on more, and Germany in particular,
Yes.
Germans say we can't say that, unless we can really prove that we're the best in the market, we cannot say that, or we can get sued. Yeah. So there's always like these little adjustments to do that are not just cultural, but also very much with legal implications. And it's funny because you were mentioning US English, and when we think about localization, we tend to immediately think translation. But do you think that this adaptation, and I think I already know the answer, applies as well to other English-speaking markets? So if you take a tech firm, a global campaign across the whole wide world, and do you think that they should adapt culturally and linguistically, even maybe, their content to local markets? Let's take the example of India, to take an Asian market.
Absolutely. You're right. I touched upon this in my previous answers, but around cultural adaptations and why or how it is important for businesses to connect with the audiences in different regions. This is also applicable to regions speaking the same language, so regions within the single language, right? So for example, within English-speaking countries, at the obvious level, there are regional and dialectal differences. So, most of us know about just the spelling differences, but there are also differences in the kind of words we use. So in America, for example, if you tell me, hey, Gargi, you know what? I got a flat. My reaction most likely would be, oh no, what a bummer. I hope everything is okay, because I would think that, you're referring to a flat tire and that, that created some inconvenience in your day or in that moment of time. In India, if you tell me that, hey, Gargi, I got a flat, I would go to you and I would say, awesome, congratulations. When is the party? Why is that? Because a flat in India refers to an apartment. So when I hear the same sentence, I think that you're buying a house and you are a new house owner. So I would be very happy for you. And I
Yeah.
would, almost have a completely opposite reaction to the same sentence or the same phrase. So that's a very like day-to-day example of how the same word can mean or can have different connotations in different markets. We always need to keep that in mind when we are reviewing an asset before sending it out for localization, or when we are giving directions to a translator saying that this is the context, this is how you should translate it, and these are the markers that we are targeting it for. But it also goes beyond that. um, Particularly for English speaking countries, um, we know that we're trying to achieve cultural adaptation. A lot of that happens with content relevancy. We need to make sure that the content we're showcasing is really relevant for these different English speaking markets. um, I remember in 2021 when USA and most of the other countries were just emerging out of COVID. India was going through its toughest period of COVID at that point. It was being hit by COVID at its worst phase in 2021. So in US, in our website, we were trying to promote a campaign at that point of time, saying that, and we're trying to highlight the positives of it, like, the fact that we are out of COVID and now we are getting into the hybrid era and you have both the options to physically attend it or to do it virtually. So the messaging and the objective was around those lines. But it just didn't seem right to promote the same campaign for India at that point because it just didn't seem humane at that point. So we took kind of, a different direction for India, and we tried to, we decided to promote a blog in the same website that would focus on how Google was providing resources to support the COVID crisis in India. And believe it or not, that was one of our top most performing blogs at that point. It had the maximum digital footprint. And so that kind of goes on to say that how within the same language, you can adapt to different speaking market and just establish yourself as a brand and get that user trust and user empathy that you want, like really meet the users where they are and not like have a
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's the COVID example is a great one because we also come across certain content where they talk about, like, for example, recession. And you
Hmm.
think, oh, well, you may be in recession, but these economies aren't. So, you
Yes.
can't really talk about recession. So you've got to adapt your content. And as you say, you've got to meet your target audience where they are. And you've got to be
Yes.
target-centric and always think about these things, whether they're health, geopolitical, economic. You've got to take into account the world around you. That's great. So Gargi, on a more personal level, can you tell us a bit more about your background and maybe your interest in languages in particular, and if it came early in life or later? Tell us.
um my background and my story is an interesting one. I had my majors done in English, and so I always had foreseen myself to be in the editorial field, so a news editor or a financial editor, like that's where I had always foreseen myself to be. So I'm a classic case of career by chance.
Mhm.
Um, so I got into localization in 2006 when the industry in itself was, just starting.
Mhm.
I was in India at that point of time, so the industry was even more nascent in India, but it sounded like a fun field to get into. It was related to English in the sense that localization is always, this is my personal belief, is a lot dependent on the source as well. So how well your source is written kind of this has an impact on how good your localization quality is. So it's a related field and it was new, so that kind of got me excited. So I got into a company in India. It was a vendor company. um, I learned a lot from that company, but very soon I kind of had the career growth and then hit the ceiling limit. And so I decided, okay, done with it. I need to like go back to my original career path that I had chosen for myself, which is being an editor. So I shifted gears. I applied for an editorial job, started working on it, loved it. Never thought that I would come back to localization. I was like, this is where I always wanted to be. This is where I'm always going to be in ever. Fast forward 3 years of my life, or a little bit, maybe 5 years of my life, and then we moved to USA. And I was trying to apply for editorial jobs because that's what my dream job was. And the only offers I was getting was in localization field. It's like a localization project manager or a localization, like anything and everything related to localization. So I stood my ground for 3 months and it's like, no, I want to do editorial job and not localization. I stood my ground and then finally gave up. I was like, okay, fine, I'll just, take this job, take it as a, toehold situation, deal with it for some time, and then continue my search with editorial jobs. And then, when I get it, I'll shift my career back to the real career that I want. But to my surprise, when I took this first localization job in US, that kind of opened my mind a lot, because now I was like, it was very interesting. It was a very fast-paced, dynamic around the company. We were launching new things, and it wasn't just like I wasn't just involved in the what aspect of it, but also like, why we are doing something and what is our objective, what are we trying to attain and achieve, and all that. So it was really, really energizing and eye-opening, and it completely shifted my perspective around localization. I was like, okay, this really is an interesting field, because I already have an advantage with my past kind of, experience in it. But every new day now I'm learning like new tools and techniques, and, every new day there is a new challenge that I'm having to solve for. So no 2 days were same. And then the more I uncovered, the more I realized that there was to uncover. So I was like, okay, let me just learn a little bit more till I get bored, and then I can switch back. And then I just had that mindset for like 3 or 4 more years. And then just naturally it just shifted my mindset. And I was like, I love localization. I'm not going to ever leave this field again. And that's how, like, I didn't realize I was like 15 plus years into this localization field, and that's how it happened. But really, I feel like localization chose me, and I tried fighting it, and I just failed miserably at it. But I'm a classic case where localization chose me. I did not choose localization at all.
Well, good job, localization insisted. And I love the fact that you say, you're learning new things every day. And you gave an example earlier about like, this form which you've got to work with somebody like from the tech team to change it for Japanese, for example, and these sort of things. So it always throws curveballs at you. You never know where they're going to come from, but that's what makes it interesting.
It's a new mystery box each and every day that you have to solve for.
And now my final question, and that's a question we ask all our guests. If you were to learn a new language, so what languages do you speak, Gargi?
I speak 4 languages.
Okay.
English, 2 Indic languages, which is Bengali, which is my mother tongue, and then Hindi, and then Italian.
And an Italian. So, okay, let's put these 4 languages aside. And if you were to learn a new one, which one would it be and why?
That's an interesting question. It's a fun question that I didn't honestly think about. I think I'm torn between 2 languages. First one is Spanish, just because I've been in that country. I love that country so much. It's so warm and bright. And I seriously plan to visit it again, and probably, maybe sometimes relocate there. So I want to learn the language so that I can actually converse with the people in their language. And, we should be a little bit more beyond good morning and thank you. So that's basically the why of it. The other language is Japanese, because I've been in the localization industry for so many years. That's just one language that always continue to throw a curveball at me. And I'm like, dang, I wish I knew this language, because then I would be able to grapple and understand what challenges they're talking about. And to my earlier point, like I've worked in so many companies and so many fields. Japanese was always treated in the same kind of, like a hyper touch mode. Like it always needed additional love and care and attention. And so that is just one mysterious language that I want to decode for my own self and understand, like, why is it the way it is? So Japanese probably would be the other language.
Perfect. I love that answer. Well, Gargi, I absolutely love talking to you, and I'm sure that the people who listen or watching us today will have learned a lot as well from your insights. Thank you for your time, and speak to you soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.